We have a major New York Mets update as the Mets have officially been named favorites for one of the best players in the MLB on the trade market, with multiple prospects already being linked to the Mets for this trade as well. There's a lot to go over with this situation as we are seeing the framework of a deal start to come together that will absolutely change the future for the Mets in a huge way, while solidifying their biggest need and also continuing to build a team that's going to be very, very dangerous. But this does come with a huge risk as well that we also have to go over, and we're going to waste no time jumping right into things as always, guys. But real quick, if you are part of that 67% or that 76% that's not subscribed to Mets Digest, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any New York Mets updates at all. We are getting on that grind right now. I know we took a couple days off, but now we are locking in. We are not missing a day of uploads for the off season, and you can bank on that. But let's jump right into it, guys. There is a whole lot to go over on the Mets right now because David Stearns has his work cut out for him going into this off season. Obviously, many expected the Mets to be a World Series contender after acquiring Juan Soto last year. However, that didn't happen. For a while, the Mets looked like the best team in baseball. However, obviously things slipped. There was the up and down stretch that led with that losing, or that ended with a losing streak that ultimately led to the Mets missing the playoffs entirely. Because of that, there has been a recoil, and the Mets obviously will have their work cut out for them, especially in one big area, and that area is obviously starting pitching. The Mets didn't have a ton of starting pitching, and outside of just literal rookies, the Mets could not get anyone who could be a consistent arm for them at all. That's obviously not the markings of a winning team, and the Mets are going to have to go out there and make some serious changes. And already with some trade talk happening, the Mets have been named favorites for none other than one of the best pitchers in the MLB in Tarik Skubal. Now, there's been a ton of reports about this, and John Harper mentioned that, as scout and executives point out, is that the Detroit Tigers are in a very difficult position. They would be risking the wrath of their championship-starved fan base if they trade Skubal, arguably the best pitcher in baseball. After reaching the postseason the last 2 years, yet they'd almost certainly lose him in free agency a year from now if they choose not to trade him, which is the issue here. And an anonymous MLB executive said, that's why it's hard to predict which way this thing is going to go. In a vacuum, it's a no-brainer. Unfortunately, considering Skubal is a Scott Boras guy and all that, you make the best trade you can get and move on. But in the real world, that's a tough sell when you haven't won in 40 years. So with that in mind, that's absolutely true. I mean, Skubal's one of the best players who the Mets or who the Tigers have had in a very long time. The man is very much on track to win his second Cy Young in a row. He had a 2.21 ERA this season in starting 31 games, had 241 strikeouts and 195.1 innings pitched, and had a whip of 0.891. He was the best pitcher in baseball this season, or at least the best pitcher in the American League this season. Dealt in the playoffs as well. Skubal's absolutely phenomenal, and one of the reasons why the Tigers are so good, because he's basically just going to go out there and cook any team that you even try to put him up against. He was absolutely excellent for the Tigers, and trading him would certainly just make the Tigers very, very likely not any team that has any ability to contending. The Tigers have, or were very recently, one of the worst teams in baseball. However, they recently started to turn it around, made some deals, but there is a lot of thought that Skubal is just going to leave for one of the bigger market teams come free agency next year, being a Scott Boras client. Whichever one that is up in the air still. However, we have seen some talk about it, and the Mets have been named the favorites for Skubal in any way. As an anonymous NL scout said, I'd make the Mets the favorite to get Skubal, no question. If the Tigers decide to trade him, they have the pieces to get it done, and they obviously have the need. Steve Cohen apologized to the fans for missing the postseason. What does that tell you? He's going to want to make a big splash moves to change that narrative, which absolutely makes sense, especially with Andy Martino saying Thursday's report in the New York Post that the Detroit Tigers and Cy Young Award winner Tarik Skubal were $250 million apart on contract value. Obviously, is not great. It landed a significant development in this winter's starting pitching trade market, a market in which the Mets will be involved. If a team and a player are that far apart 12 months before Skubal hits free agency, it's logical to assume the Tigers will explore trades. Might Skubal remain with Detroit next season? Sure, but the Post story seemed like a big move in the other direction. A subsequent report in the Detroit Free Press added that the Tigers last year offered Skubal a 4-year contract for less than $100 million. And with that in mind, it's just very clear what feels like it's going to happen. And the Mets have the golden opportunity to go out there and land Skubal onto this team. Now, Martino continued by saying if or when the Tigers decide to take calls on Skubal, expect the Mets to be motivated and involved. While I don't think the Mets would deal Nolan McLean for any of one-year player, McLean is part of the future, not a trade piece. The Mets surely know that they would have to discuss just about any other prospect or young player to land Skubal because the Tigers are in their window to win. They would probably want an MLB talent in addition to prospects like Jonah Tong and Jet Williams. For what it's worth, Detroit has expressed interest in Brett Baty in the past, so there is that. But at the end of the day, it would cost an arm and a leg. Now, McLean, he seems safe just because trading him in an effort that, or in a world where Skubal leaves, is just such a major thing here. And that's really the twist to this whole story. That's the thing here. Skubal, if he gets traded to the Mets, can walk in a year. He can go wherever he wants. He's gonna hit free agency. Scott Boras is gonna try to make Skubal and probably succeed as long as Skubal continues to do what he does. He's gonna succeed at making Skubal the highest paid pitcher in baseball history, that is. On top of that, there's just going to be a whole lot else when every single team that can afford him is going to be pitching Skubal a deal to where he is going to be spending a lot of time considering his free agency. And if he doesn't believe the Mets can win, he likely will walk. Now, maybe the Mets are willing to make him just the highest paid player by far and nobody else is going to come close. That's very possible because I don't think Steve Cohen wants to be laughed at the way that Mets fans got to laugh at the Yankees for the whole Juan Soto situation. I don't think Cohen wants to do that. So, I do expect that if the Mets are to trade for Skubal, and if anyone is to trade for Skubal, I do fully expect it to be the Mets. I really do see a world that the Mets obviously will watch Skubal hit free agency, but re-sign him, and it won't really be that much of a discussion, just based off how much we know Steve Cohen's gonna be willing to pay Skubal to stick around for this team. So I fully expect that to happen. Obviously, it also depends on what exactly Skubal looks like in a Mets jersey. Can he perform? Obviously, the assumption is, yeah, he'll be able to perform. He's Tarik Skubal. We shouldn't really have any doubts on that. But it is something to consider. I mean, on top of that, we just look at all the other players that we could see. Noah Tong right here obviously was not good in the MLB this year when he appeared in a couple of games. He appeared in 5 games. 2 of them lost here, but his ERA was terrible at a 7.71 ERA in his first ever MLB action. So there is that concern that I imagine the Tigers will definitely have. But in the minors, the man was downright phenomenal at a 1.43 ERA in 22 starts at a whip of 0.92. So we have seen we've seen Jonah Tong go out there and absolutely cook. Meanwhile, we do see Jet Williams, who is a very, 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 very good fielder. Also, continuing to become a better hitter as time has gone on. His OPS improved a little bit on his career average, literally by 0.001, but still, on top of that, the on-base percentage, the average, a little bit elevated. So we do see that Jet Williams, especially being a center fielder who's a phenomenal fielder, is someone who would likely be involved in this trade as well to Detroit, on top of a guy like a Brett Baty, who has been up and down with the Mets since showing up. Obviously, there was a whole lot of thought that he was going to be this superstar player and he couldn't really figure it out, but now we're starting to see Brett Baty really get it going. In 393 at-bats this season, he had 100 hits. It's a 254 batting average, which is above his career average. He had a 748 OPS, an OPS plus of 111, so right around average hitting for the year as well with a 3.1 WAR. So we saw Baty really get things going for the Mets as time went on this season, and he started to find a rhythm. Now would be the time to sell high on Baty, knowing the way that he has not been really consistent throughout his MLB career thus far. It does make sense to make that move. But even so, I do think Jonah Tong, Jet Williams, and Brett Baty does not even really get this deal done. I fully imagine that the Mets would have to go out there and offer a ton more if they do want to land Tarik Skubal, which they do. So I'm expecting the Mets to give more as well on top of this. There will be multiple prospects. Again, this isn't any pitcher. This is Tarik Skubal. It's going to be an absolute treasure trove of assets that's going to include basically anyone the Mets are going to have to include for it who's not Nolan McLean. So we're going to see off that. But guys, obviously, there's a lot that's still going to come with the Mets, and we are going to be updating you on all that. So make sure you're subscribed, have those post notifications turned on, like this video. Have a wonderful day, guys. I'll catch you later.